kind of the top, the summit of the Nazi police state.
And do you know,
They were the perpetrators.
do you know what it reminds me of a little bit? When Hitler started out, one of the main things that he campaigned on was abolishing the Treaty of Versailles and, you know, the war guilt clause, but all of the conditions that were imposed upon Germany, and all that shame, all that heartache, all that embarrassment of losing that war. And there were these concepts of Diktat and Dolchstoß. And I feel that Germans were like, what? So we can just like sweep this under the rug and pretend that we were cheated out of this war and scrap the Treaty of Versailles, and it'll be almost like it never happened if we vote for him. And there's almost, and you can see why that would be tempting to people. And I can see a similar process going on now. They're like, what? So we can kind of try and sweep this under the rug and like start all over anew, and it might be like none of that ever happened.
Yeah, and you certainly see that with Fischer-Schweder, right? With the Ulm trial.
Yeah, let's move on to Fischer-Schweder, because it's interesting how one man's action and one man's story is so central to the West German trials. And Fischer-Schweder, just let's begin with who he was in 1941. So he was a commander of Einsatzgruppe Tilsit, and they were a subdivision of Einsatzgruppe A, who followed Army Group North through the Baltic states. And they were called Einsatzgruppe Tilsit because the members were made up of the police and the SD from the Tilsit region. But Fischer-Schweder was the police chief of Memel, and when he became police chief of Memel in 1941, he was given SS rank as well. And he became one of the commanders of this Einsatzgruppe unit, and they murdered people along a 25-kilometer stretch of the Lithuanian-German border. So the border towns that had
East Prussia,
Prussia, and you know, famously Garsden is one of the places where these massacres took place, and he played a leading role in leading this unit, but he also voluntarily took part in the shootings himself, although he didn't need to. He was a commander for whatever reasons. For maybe he wanted to show leadership, maybe he just had interest in being involved in the shootings himself. But he went and he was pulling triggers himself and finishing people off when they were on the floor. And there was, you know, we might get to this later, but when the truth of who he was starts to come about, there's accusations of horrifying sadism, like making victims jump over a ditch and then saying that they would survive if they got to the other side, and then when they were in the air, shooting them dead into the ditch. And by the end of their operational activities, this Einsatzgruppe unit Einsatzkommando unit had murdered around 5,000 people, and they were especially active straight after the invasion of the Soviet Union. When you look at there, and there's quite detailed operational logs that were sent to the commander of Einsatzgruppe A, detailing what Einsatzkommando Tilsit had done, which later became very relevant. So this guy was a mass murderer. And then we see, after the war, he is interned in an American POW camp. So this is 1945, 1946. And the denazification process in Germany, so my undergraduate dissertation was actually in denazification. So I've got a good understanding of these denazification questionnaires that were given out. So we've got to understand the vastness of the job, denazifying Germany. And this means on all fronts. that especially people, the old guard, the people that had been Nazis since the 1920s and had held SS positions, those were the ones that that the Allies especially wanted to remove from any position of authority. So
particularly the civil service, right? The civil service was one of the major.
So yeah, any government employees especially, and these questionnaires. I think if anybody listening or watching this has never heard of these questionnaires, they are absolutely It's almost incredible to think that they were relying on the honesty of the people filling out these questionnaires. So it's like, were you a horrendous mass murderer during the war? Yes or no? I'll just take no for that one. And it's that ridiculous, isn't it? So Fischer-Schweder is filling this out. Do you remember this Nazi, the inaccuracies that he put on his denazification questionnaire?
Yeah. He made no mention of the fact he was in the SS.
Yeah, and he also changed his name from, he's called Bernhard Fischer-Schweder, and he changed it to Bernhard Fischer, and he changed his birth date from, I think it's like February the 14th, 1904 to January the 12th. So he's a sly one, and obviously he's a sly, murdering Nazi bastard, this guy. And I think the reason
there's that emotional reaction pouring forth, right?
Yeah, and you've got to laugh though, haven't you? Otherwise,
that's true.
And I think I was thinking about the reasons for these slight changes on the denazification. Why don't you just make himself a completely new name up? And why is his birthday just moved a month? And obviously he says that, I was working for the police, but he leaves out his SS membership. That one's obvious, and that's just a complete omission. But what reasons do you think, why is he just changing it slightly here?
Yeah, I can only speculate, but to me, it's having worked in criminal justice for many, many years, obviously never dealing with a case quite like this one, but certainly with people who are trying to throw the law off of their scent a little bit. I mean, to me, it's fairly clear that what he's trying to do is just create an alternative identity for himself. And that would be enough, right? Changing your birth date and fundamentally changing your name. At that point, you're in a position to be able to fend off, at least technically be able to fend off charges that you might have been a certain Bernhard Fischer-Schweder, who worked as the director of the police in the Tilsit Einsatzgruppe, right? He might, no, I'm not that guy. My name might be similar to that, but no, I'm a different guy. That's somebody else. You're thinking of someone else. I mean, to me, it's clearly trying to trying to preempt the possibility of being identified. Because he knew how incriminating, and this is a key point, right? He knew how incriminating his work was.
Yeah.
He knew it.
Yeah. And you can say later on down the line, it must have been an administrative error that someone else has made. Like, if it comes down to it, you can say, it must have been, some lost over the, someone else has transcribed it, and it's, unless they get the document that he's actually written, which is busted, but he can then say later on down the line, oh no, that was an administrative error. So
of course,
it's
a skein of lies. I mean, and we see that through his career, all the way through his conviction, right? In 1958, he's ensnared in coil after coil of lie after lie after fabrication, and it's not surprising because he was deeply incriminated, and he was trying to, like the country as a whole, was trying to have a Stunde Null. This is like a personal Stunde Null for Fischer-Schweder. That's what he wanted.
It was a bit of a rebirth, actually, wasn't it, for him? Because a bit of a rebirth.
Yes, exactly.
Completely reinvents himself. So he leaves his wife straight away as well. We don't know if I wouldn't put it past that guy if he's like, well, if she's gonna get me busted, so I'll just leave her as well. No, he's a disgusting human being, so I can't imagine any scruples about ditching his wife, and they'd been married about 15 years, and then he was like, so it's a bit of a coincidence that he decides to completely reinvent himself. and then leaves his wife, finds a new wife very quickly, and has children like immediately. So within months of him divorcing his ex-wife and changing his identity, he's got a new wife. He starts to do odd jobs, and moves to a new city. So new location, new wife, new family, new name, new profession, and he ends up being a door-to-door vacuum salesman, doesn't he? Yeah, and then it's because of the amnesty laws, isn't it, that he decides that he wants to upgrade his life. You can imagine he was police chief of Memo. He was quite high up in the SS. He was an important guy. He had power over life and death, and now he's moving from door to door selling vacuums. And I can imagine, obviously, it's a massive step down for someone like him.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it?
Yeah.
He goes from being the police director of this Einsatzkommando, murdering thousands and thousands of people, to being a door-to-door vacuum seller.
Yeah.
Salesman. It's just...
Yeah.
The ironies.
Yeah, some of the doors that he probably knocked on might have been Jewish people as well.
Could have been.
Can you imagine? Like, but then the amnesty laws come in, and these are providing amnesty for people that used to be in the civil service. So Fischer-Schweder's seeing these amnesty laws that come in first of all, coming in about 1951.
51.
Yeah. But he waits a little while, doesn't he? Like I said, he's a sly one. He waits a couple of years, doesn't he?
Article 131, right, which is an amendment to the basic law. Got to change the rules and really permitted the re-entry of Nazis, people who had been Nazi party members and who had been removed by the Allies after 1945 from the civil service because of their Nazi past. These individuals now, with Article 131, had a right to file an application for restoration to the civil service. And that was 51. I think he filed there were two applications, I think, that he filed. And the one application was for reintegration into the civil service under the 131 law. He wanted to have himself declared to be eligible.
Yeah.
For reintegration under Article 131. And he waited until 53, I think it was 53, to do that. So he waited a couple of years.
Yeah, lay low.
He was cautious. He was being cautious.
Yeah, well, he's quite competent in being an awful human being, wasn't he? And he laid low, and then eventually he lands on his feet. He gets put in charge of a displaced persons camp in Ulm, and this had kind of fallen into disrepair. It was flooded, or it was made for about 2,500 people. It had 4,000 people in it. These are mainly German refugees fleeing the east, and he's given the top job in this DP camp, in this displaced persons camp. And I think this is January 1954. He gets this job, or he starts this job. And he was fortunate to get that job. That's a good position. I can imagine he was delighted with that.
It was a managerial position, and as a civil servant, right? So his application was granted, and then he not only was he rendered eligible, declared to be eligible under 131 for reintegration, he's given this great job in a little area near Ulm, right?
And had he just accepted that and kept his head down, we might not be talking about the Ulm trials, certainly, but maybe these other West German trials that took place. Who knows? Would they have taken place much later and not had the effect, or just looked completely different to how they look now? So if he just keeps his head down now, but he couldn't, could he? So he does a pretty good job, and then about 6 months later, apparently he's considered for a promotion, actually, to an even more prestigious or bigger camp somewhere, but he doesn't get the job. But then he has converted an old stable within this displaced persons camp into a theatre, and the press are like, oh, well, that's quite an interesting story. Let's go along and cover this, because he's turned an old stable into a communal area for the people inside the displaced persons camp. But if I was him, I'd be like, I would not be getting my head photographed whatsoever, but there must be like some kind of narcissism and obviously hubris. And this is where you see the gall of this man. So he allows the press in, and it was because of this that one of his guards is patrolling the perimeter. And so there was a guy who is patrolling the perimeter and sees a guy who he describes as tall, lanky, thin and pale, pacing up and down outside. And the guard has written this report back to Fischer-Schweder, saying that he's seen this guy, and that this guy said, it's not going to be long before everybody knows who Fischer-Schweder is. I know who this man is. And this is kind of the first point where you can see Fischer-Schweder's great new life starting to unravel. And this guard, who's called Billy Palmer, writes to Fischer-Schweder, I am extremely grieved that there are people who would want to believe your successes in this camp, where you really have given so much effort and done so much. So he's reporting back in a very snivelling way to Fischer-Schweder, and people are starting to notice him now.
Yeah, I mean, all of this is going to lead to his losing his job.
Well, it does, doesn't it? Because after that, the regional authorities reach out to the Berlin Document Center, and I think this is really interesting as well. So regional authorities, they find out, they get a file on him, they find out who he is, find out that he's lied on his denazification certificate, on his application forms, so he's a liar. But this is also going to look really bad on them if they've employed a leading member of the SS to be in charge of one of their displaced people camps. So they just say to Fischer-Schweder, right, just resign. We will give you a glowing reference and the opportunity to resign. You just need to get out of it, and let's, again, sweep this under the rug. It's not good for either of us. And I thought it was, the theme of this guy just being a complete sly bastard is again seen in this, because in his resignation letter, I don't know if you've seen this. Have you seen his resignation letter?
I think I looked at it. Yeah. Refresh my memory.
Yeah, it says, as for the reason for my resignation, I want to note that an extremely opportune job in the industry has been offered to me, which pays considerably more than my current position. In the interest of my family, I would like to take this offer. So he's
another lie. And talk about the coils of lies, right? And just one after the other. Here's another lie.
And you can see why he's done that, though. So if ever like his new employer gets wind of it, it's like, oh, so why did you resign? Oh, there was a really lucrative position that I needed to. No, you were sacked for being a liar and a murderer, and basically it was clear that you were a mass murderer.
But interesting that his employer, the state authorities, were willing to play ball with him.
Yeah, well, they were probably Nazis too, and they're just trying to cover everybody's just trying to cover their own back, and they don't care. You see this often over and over again. They don't really care if someone was a murderer during the war. They just want to be successful. They just want to get on, like we said. They want to let the past lie, don't they? They don't want to be involved with this.
It's Stunde Null for everybody.
Yeah. And then, so this happens. And again, Fischer-Schweder has now got another opportunity. Just keep your head down. Obviously, that tall, lanky guy was pacing up and down. And he said that you would, be exposed, but you haven't. You've just been sacked. You've been given a glowing reference. You've been given the opportunity. All they've said is, okay, we're not going to report you to the authorities. You've lied on your application forms. That's what you've done wrong. And we're going to resign. It's the best thing for us. So had he then just taken leave, again, would we be talking about the Ulm Einsatzkommando trial? Probably not, but he just can't. So he can't find another decent job. So then the amazing and pivotal moment is Michael when what legal measure does he decide to take, which is just beyond belief, really, isn't it?
Well, I forgive me for laughing, but because there is a level of just, the word you used was hubris, and that's exactly right. He thought he was
untouchable,
invulnerable, right? I mean,
yeah,
he was invulnerable. He's the magic man, because he actually he eventually is going to try to plead his case in the papers. He's going to publish this letter. I can't recall what the newspaper was,
and sue the regional authorities for making him resign.
Yeah. He does that as well. That's not what gets him into trouble, though.
Yeah.
What gets him into trouble is that letter that he dashes off.
Yeah.
To the local newspaper.
So he decides that he's going to sue his ex-employers for making him resign because he can't find another job. And this is quite an interesting. So this is coming to light now, and the press are quite interested in this. So they find out a former SS man is suing his ex-employers, who are the people that are the authorities of a displaced person camp. So it's quite an interesting story for the press to cover. And like you said, this letter what was he saying in the letter?
Yeah, I mean, he portrays himself as being a victim. He taps into that victim narrative that so many Germans embraced after the war, and again, being victimized by two sources, right? So the victim of the Nazis. Mm-hmm. He was actually a victim, not a perpetrator, but he himself was victimized by the Nazis. And then he was also victimized by the Federal Republic of Germany, which mistreated him and wrongfully terminated him from his employment.
And who knows if he actually started to believe his own lies? Because I know people can. Have you seen what's going on in the world today? People are fed a narrative, they feed themselves a narrative, and they just start to live this fantastical truth, don't they? And lots of people caught wind of this. So Fischer-Schweder is now pleading his case through the press as well. And the trial does not go well for him. Obviously, it's thrown out of court, and then he's saddled with the bill.
Yeah, you're talking about his lawsuit against his
lawsuit. Yes, his lawsuit against his ex-employers is thrown out as farcical, and he's saddled with the bill. So he's not in a great position now. Obviously, it's a significant amount of money for someone that's unemployed as well. But his ex-secretary now, someone called Mita Ponale. And there's a few people that are see this press release that he's done and just thinking, well, that's absurd. One of them says 150% Nazi, and she's the one that relays this story about how he made Jews jump over a ditch and shoot them into it. And then there's ex-people that worked with him that are saying, well, no, he was leading executions. And then we get a prosecutor called Erwin Schüle, who enters the fray at this point, and he starts his investigations, doesn't he?
Right. Appointed by the Solicitor General of Stuttgart, I believe. Erich Nellman appoints Schüle as the head prosecutor of the case. And Schüle is an interesting character too. He'll become the first director of the Central Office for the Investigation of Nazi War Crimes. Yeah, but an interesting character because he kind of had a checkered past of his own.
Yeah, but it's because of individuals and their determination, and Erwin Schüle's a central figure in these post-war West German trials. It's because of people like him, like this individual agency and determination that this is not going to get swept under the rug. And his investigation begins with Fischer-Schweder, then he casts the net out a bit further and finds more perpetrators that are implicated in Einsatzkommando Tilsit. So it becomes more of a trial in the context of the crimes of Einsatzgruppe A in Lithuania rather than this targeted just on Fischer-Schweder.